Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Also, check out Off the Floor. That's our Discord server, $2.99 per month. Bypass the Apple upcharge. Click on the link that's here in the description. Pay the $2.99. You can cancel at any time. You get access to 10 different channels, the most heat, conversation, and information, and also to our stage shows. Check it out. It's Off the Floor. That's our Discord server. Also, check out Prize Picks. Use the code 5FIVE. Put down $5. Get $50 to play right away. Legal in the state of Florida. Prize Picks is the official fantasy partner of the Five Reasons Sports Network. Why? Because it's daily fantasy simplified. Again, you can play across the sports spectrum up to 6 players together. We know how many of our listeners and viewers are already playing. Join them. Use the code 5FIVE. Get $50 to play right away. And now, today's episode.
Mercy, luxurious, Heat Nation, yeah, Mercy and Lago, down to Biscayne, yay, five on the floor, ride for my dogs, where here's the thing, you can check the score, hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frauds, down to Biscayne. Kept the floor playing, got it all banned. Y'all seen the block, stop with one hand. And Pat we trust, Inspire have the guts. We're here to bring the heat, y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, Alex Toledo, Brady Hawk, and others from the Five Reasons Sports Network. Also, make sure to subscribe to Off the Floor for the most heat anywhere.
All right, welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick at 5 Reasons Sports. I got Brady Hawk. You can follow him at Brady Hawk 305. The Miami Heat coming off a loss in Cleveland, an expected loss, a scheduled loss, an injury-related loss, except it really shouldn't have been a loss because they had a lead, as usual, and they were playing really well against what has been by far the best team in the East this year. And then it all fell apart at the end, and we could see it falling apart. And it's just like this. I don't know. It's just it starts to go. And I'm sorry if on the post game show I couldn't really talk about anything but Terry Rozier, but it was hard to see past that. And so I didn't give enough credit to Bam's great game, and I didn't mean to do that, or the fact that the Heat showed great grit and to take the lead. But it's becoming a frustrating watch experience, and we can tell by our downloads. Many of you are frustrated by it as well. And so we're going to get into that a little bit today. Try to spin it a little bit more productively. And Brady and I are going to talk about what should Erik Spoelstra be experimenting with now? Because I said this on a previous podcast. And by the way, the one podcast you should listen to is we did a podcast with Davion Mitchell, and I thought he was great in terms of his conversation with us, and I think you'll enjoy it. So go back. It's 2 podcasts back from this, and make sure you check it out. But there's just a reality of this situation, and I think this is why a lot of people have tuned this team out. They're stuck. I mean, they're stuck. They've blown too many games, and I don't even want to relive all of them, but dozen double-digit leads in the second half or something along those lines. So they're not getting out of the plan. They're not. Okay, they are. You can clip this, and hopefully I'll be wrong later. But I mean, they're not catching the Bucks. They're now 7 games behind the Bucks for 4th. They are 6.5 games behind the Pacers for 5th. And they are, what are they, 5 games behind the Pistons for 6th, but they've lost to the Pistons twice already, and they get them again here coming up at home. But that's gone. The tiebreaker's gone there. So they're essentially 6 games behind them. The Pistons are 8-2 in their last 10, and they're getting the confidence that a young team that played well and over their heads starts to get towards the end of the season. And at the same time, as I mentioned this, Brady, they're not really going to drop much more either, because they're, even with the loss to Cleveland, they're still a full 8 games ahead of the Nets, who've come back to earth now and are not really trying to win. And they're 8 games ahead of the Sixers, who've shut Joel Embiid down and have lost 9 of 10. So they're not falling out of the play-in. They're going to be somewhere between 7 and 10. And if they beat the Bulls this week, then that's going to be insurmountable for the Bulls to catch them, most likely, because the Bulls currently are now, what is this? They're already 5.5 behind them. Okay, I say the Bulls are 5.5 behind the Heat. So if the Heat beat them, The Bulls are not going to catch them either, even though the Heat have a murderous schedule coming up in about a week in terms of the level of opponents they're playing. So the Heat are going to be somewhere between 7 and 9. So they're essentially, it's who wins this awful Southeast Division: the Heat, the Magic, and the Hawks. The Magic got off to a great start this season, lost their best two players, then kept playing well, got their two best players back, and have played poorly since. And now they've lost their third best player in Suggs. And the Hawks, we've seen the Hawks, but I mean the Hawks are. I mean it's Trey. They don't have Jalen Johnson. Like, this is just not fun. Okay, so I guess, Brady, it comes down to this: like, they're stuck. They're going to be in this spot, and that would lead me to believe that Erik Spoelstra has the liberty to experiment. Right? Am I wrong about that?
I think on the flip side, what he also is saying is that there's an opportunity in the East to still like scrape your way into the playoffs and be a hard out. Like, I think that's also what you're kind of seeing them convince themselves of. But I agree. I think you're in a spot where you have this is one of the few seasons you kind of note like the history of it, where there's a few of these type of seasons that is kind of where you're transitioning, but you have nothing to lose. Like, you just have nothing to lose right now. And there's no reason not to experiment with some of these other things, because there's so many like for sures with this roster right now that like you head into a game and you know what's going to happen. You know there's going to be a lead. You know that it's going to be blown. You know if this player plays, if Terry plays, he's going to play 40 minutes, but it's not going to be pretty. Like, there's so many things you do know. So how about you kind of find some of the things you don't? And I think it's hard right now to talk about it just because they are so injury driven. Like, the roster last night is not probably a roster where you're experimenting, but there was still opportunity. I mean, you had three other guys available, and they were your three two-ways. They were your guys that you kind of want to see a little bit more. So I'm curious to see. I know we were kind of heading in this direction with this episode, but like, can they find minutes specifically in these type of games for guys like Stevens, Keyshawn, and Josh Christopher? And I'll say Keyshawn is probably the most promising and can be used right now, but it's probably the hardest to find minutes for him, just because they've hit this spot right now where Haywood needs minutes. Haywood is for sure in the rotation right now. That, are you playing Keyshawn and Haywood, or is it kind of repetitive now? Defensively, I think it could be good. I think transition stuff. I think what you saw last night is that Miami was at their best when they were in those Haywood Davion minutes, when they were just defensive heavy. They were just hounding you on the perimeter, and then they were pushing on the break. And I think Keyshawn brings, a good development of that. Stevens is just a player that I think a lot of people just want to see, because we don't know what he even looks like at the NBA level. Like, we saw the flashes of the passing. We saw he could be undersized. Like, we'll see what it looks like defensively. If he's at the top of a zone, I think that's probably where they'd keep him. And I'm curious to see how he could run an offense. So that's just what could be seen. And Josh Christopher is just a player that could, like Terry, like in theory, could get hot. Like, he's streaky. Like, there's portions, but there's just more defensive upside on that end, just because he's bigger and he's a better perimeter defender. So that just leads to you just saying, like, there is opportunity here where it does feel like you can lean into this. And then there's this other guy, when they are healthy, is Pelle Larsson, who's kind of got stashed. That I think he's even a guy that we saw. There's going to be learning opportunities, because I thought there's just too many dumb fouls right now in his rookie season. Like, defensively, it's hard to keep him out there for a long portion of minutes because he's so physical. He's a physical offensive player, and I mean that in a positive way. But the negative way is he's handsy on defense and physical, that he's a rookie. He's going to get called for those fouls. So I don't know if you do play him more. I don't know how much the minutes will go up, because I do think those type of fouls will creep up. But I want that guy to learn. I want, in a season, when you're in a transition season and you're kind of stuck in a certain spot, you want to develop into some of your young guys. So that's what we called for early in the season with Ware, and eventually he got the start, and I think it turned out pretty great. Like, this is what you need with these type of seasons. So now it's time to go down the line, see what else you have, because if you don't have something down there, if some of the guys that we're projecting are going to be pretty good for this team, if they aren't, now you have an off season to go figure out and fix your two ways or fix the next talent, and now you move forward. So I'm interested in just seeing what they have at this point.
Well, I mean, typically when teams go to a lot of young players or two-way players, undrafted players towards the end of the season, everybody says, "Oh, they're tanking." But in this case, first thing, the Heat don't tank. They're not trying to tank. They can't tank. They literally can't. I keep saying this. They cannot drop out of the play-in. It's not going to happen. I mean, they could tank the play-in, I guess. And so that the whole lottery situation, and we've talked about the draft pick that they have and all the rest of that, but they can't tank. So it's not, playing the young players for me is not about everybody says tank, play the young players. No, you're actually tanking if you play Terry Rozier 40 minutes. That's what's happening here, and I just don't understand the upside to it. Like, he's not helping you win games. He's not going to be a part of your long-term future. So what are you doing? I mean, that's the thing, and it almost feels unfair to Terry at this point because we don't want to be piling on Terry. I mean, it's just not working. Like, it's not working. He sees it. Everybody sees it. We talked about it on the pod last night. Like, this is a case where the eye test and the metrics are completely aligned. Okay. Like, you don't need a metric to tell you that, like, those two jumpers that he took on that one possession is not good basketball. It's not winning basketball. But beyond that, the metrics are awful. They're awful when he's on the court, offensively, defensively, in any lineup that he's in. And I get what you're saying about Larson and the fact that he is handsy. Okay, so let him foul out. Like, I mean, yes, he's gonna give up some fouls and obviously get a team in the penalty, get this or free throws. I get all of that, but I don't. If you like, look, our guy Sean Rochester on the network, has the thing. Well, playing Stevens, Christopher, these young guys, if they had somebody who was I don't want to speak for him, but it's basically like playing a bunch of G League guys doesn't solve your problem. This team is going to be what it's going to be regardless. But again, to me at this stage, there is something to be learned about them and by them in these situations. And, I guess Spoelstra's response to this, because he wasn't asked about Rozier after the game last night, was, well, Terry played 40 minutes and we were in this game with the best team in the East. But he's not responsible for that. He wasn't the reason. The reason they were in that game was good overall collective defense, a connectivity we didn't expect, and a great performance from Bam Adebayo. That's why they were in that game. And I also thought that Cleveland looked a little tired playing 3 out of 4 until they sort of summoned the energy at the end of it. That's what good teams do. There's like they'll coast a little bit, and then okay, there's 7-8 minutes left. We're going to turn it on. So I don't think we can read into the fact that Rozier was on the court for 40 minutes and they were competitive against Cleveland when they shouldn't have been as a positive for Rozier. He needs to play the young guys at this point in those type of games. Okay, I understand trying to find a rotation for the playoffs. Okay, if you're in the play-in game and put yourself in a position where you have something consistent that you can go to. But right now, he doesn't have Wiggins. He doesn't have Hawkins. He doesn't have Jovic. Two of those guys, one of those guys was a starter. The other was basically become their sixth man. The other Hawkins had a role in some way on this team, even though he struggled at time for large parts of the season. He doesn't have those guys. Just then lean into Young. That's what I would do because he has nothing to lose. He's got nothing to lose. There's no. What is the worst case scenario now that they fall to 9? Oh, and they have to win one home playing game, and then the worst and then they'll be 8. Okay, so then if they win both of those playing games and they play Cleveland instead of Boston, what do they have to lose right now, Brady? Nothing.
Nothing. I'll say this when I'm talking about when we're talking about them going young to like these guys, it's more so in the current state of the regular season. Like, it's not saying like tank. When you were talking about the playoff stuff, like when they're healthy, I think there is a for sure rotation they should get to, like of the win now guys. Like I think it's Davion, Tyler, Wiggins, Bam Ware, and I think off the bench there's a kind of a sure 4 that have kind of broken forward here, and it's probably Duncan, Burks, Haywood, and Jovic. I think those are kind of your
provided Jovic is healthy. Otherwise, it's Kyle Anderson.
If Jovic is healthy, I think those are your 4 off the bench. You stagger Bam and Ware a little bit so you have a big on the floor and you roll out. And I think that's you can live and die by that in the play-in game, and whatever happens. But I think the state of right now, when you're seeing the inevitables happen, when they're getting to certain things, like last night when they had I know you guys talked about it, but I was kind of talking about it during the game last night when they went late in the game when Davion subbed in, Duncan comes out. That in itself was crazy at an offensive possession.
Yeah.
But the lineup on the floor was Davion Mitchell, Terry Rozier, Kyle Anderson, Haywood Highsmith, and Bam Adebayo. I'm like, how do you expect to score? Like against Cleveland, like how do you expect to score with this? I know it was like live and die by Bam and he was getting tough buckets, but like there's a case of spacing here that you need that I do think lineups are probably more important than the rotation itself. And I think that's kind of what's been talked about more than anything this season when it's come to Smo and losing some of these games. It's like there's just certain lineup combinations that was like there's just certain guys that work. We said it earlier in the season, like it was Jovic, Tyler, and Ware that was clicking. Like you have to lean into that. Right now, to me, it's Davion and Haywood. I just think those are some of their best lineups just because they have an identity. They have ball pressure. They have something where they can get stops and they can run the floor a little bit. You have to lean into this stuff. And I think the Terry 40 minutes that you're mixing in, not that we keep bringing up Terry, but it's just it's the example. I mean, it is that's the guy that he's playing almost the entire game that is, not helping on either end of the floor. Those are the spot minutes where I feel like, as much as I say Keyshawn is kind of repetitive, I'd almost rather you be repetitive and have an identity than have nothing. Like than just throw a guy out there just because you feel like throwing him out there. So I'm interested to see that element of it, just because we said earlier in the season too, like there were certain guys you wanted to see play more for a spark. Like you wanted to see them energize. Keyshawn Johnson, I think, can energize a lot right now. I think the young guys can energize a lot right now. It almost feels like they need some type of a spark, even if it is a summer league spark, just for spot minutes. It's not for long periods of time, but just to cover a little bit of ground.
No, I'm with you on it. And when we come back, we'll talk about which of those guys. You talked about how each might be able to help in certain circumstances. But I want to get into that a little bit deeper with you. Before we do, I want to mention a great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, our friends over at All Pro Construction Builders. You can find them at allproconstructionbuilders.com. Call our guy Danny at 305-484-4429. That's 305-484-4429. All Pro Construction Builders. Quality is their specialty. This is a local family-owned business. They service Monroe, Broward, Dade counties. They're based in Miami. And they do a great job. They use the best materials. If you mention 5 Reasons, not only do you get the free estimate, but you get 5% off your entire order. So check it out. It's All Pro Construction Builders, allproconstructionbuilders.com. It's 305-484-4429, 305-484-4429, allproconstructionbuilders.com. Okay, you mentioned, let's take Stevens specifically. All right. So we know what his skill set is. He's an elite passer. He's small. They're already playing a small guard in Davion Mitchell. They're playing a small guard in Terry Rozier, but with his wingspan thing, Mitchell is stockier than Stevens, plays stronger than Stevens. For like a role for somebody like Isaiah Stevens, like it feels like they kind of know what kind of player he is. But like you said, wouldn't you want to see him get some reps here to see if the defense is because the defense is the concern here because of his size. If the defense is so bad that they can't play around it, otherwise, why keep him as a two-way at this stage? Like, why he's not going to get bigger?
Yeah, that's why I kind of said I think they would play zone a good amount of him. Like, I mean, if they can, Terry isn't like super undersized in that nature, but I mean they've hit guys before. I mean, it's not like. It's more so when I say I don't think he's a defensive liability in that way. I just think if he gets caught on a switch, it's over from there. Like I just think there's some mismatch hunting that teams can get to with him. But like you said, I want to see that element. I think there's certain lineups they could get to where they could be a little bit more wing oriented with him. I mean, there was lineups last night that I was watching where it was like specifically those lineups where they get to a ton of movement where it's like Duncan, Haywood, Bam. I think Stevens could fit right in there. I just think the playmaking element of it where he could kind of hit cutters. And just be more into that motion style, like not to keep bringing up the Terry lineups, but like I just think there are certain moments there in the half court when there's not as much motion and it's more dribble, and it's more pick and roll and step backs and there's just less movement. Where I think Stevens gives a different element of that type of motion offense that I think Miami ultimately always wants to get to. It's when they're at their best, when they're cutting, they're not going to isolate you to a win. It's just not what they're going to do. So. I'm just curious. I also want to know what the 3-point shot looks like. Like how real is that? Has that developed? I think there's certain things here that we want to see. I think they're obviously seeing it in practice right now. I know after they came down, but like it's tough to say how they work it in completely when they're healthy. But like I said before, if there was ever a time to do it, it's right now. And then Josh Christopher, I think he's just somebody that on a game when you like if in a stretch where you maybe don't have Tyler right now. And you're taking Terry out of the rotation in this instance, you're going to need a little bit of shot creation. Let's see what he has. I think The difference with Josh Christopher is I really, not to say it in this sense, but I really do think we kind of do know what he is. Like there's not much of as much of an unknown with him as there is with the other two, just because we've seen him at the NBA level, we've seen him consistently over a long period of time. But I do think there are flashes that he could still help in certain cases. But like you said, I mean, it's more so about Stevens and Keyshawn, just kind of seeing what you have here. We'll see if these guys play tomorrow night. If these same guys, I mean, there's these injuries seem like they're going to linger. I mean, Jaime's looked pretty bad. It's a little better than we originally thought. Jovic is going to be out probably a month. Wiggins, I'm not even sure what that case is. It felt like that was an injury that really snuck up. We didn't even really know about the ankle injury like that. And all of a sudden he's getting questionable. Then now it's going to doubtful. Then goes to plain out. Like how this goes before. Like we've seen these things linger on. So you're in a case now where you may seeing these injuries progress longer into the season. It's time to lean youthful. And I think that was the whole point of this conversation, was just the fact that we know what they are. We know what some of the results are going to be with this roster. It's just time to see something new. I think we're all sick of seeing the same product.
Well, and it's like you talked about with Ware. Like we were like, okay, there's going to be ups and downs. There have been. There's been times that he hasn't been as playable. The offensive rating with him on the court hasn't been great, but there's also been flashes where you're kind of like, okay, like we see what they saw. We see where this could go. I also think there's value in seeing some other combinations together. It's just a different kind of season. Like this is the time in March where he kind of fine tunes a rotation. But again, he doesn't have a healthy roster right now. He's got new pieces. This is not an easy thing. And it's like, well, I'm trying to give grace here for that, for also him holding the team together to some degree during the whole Jimmy thing. They don't have Jimmy to go to now. They got to find different ways to play. I think that he has played some role, it seems, in Bam finding himself, which is a big thing. And we were going to do an episode on Bam and the way he's played, but we kind of did that 2 weeks ago. He's sustained it. He's continued to play at a high level. And a lot of people were on Bam. We know Spo is kind of Bam's biggest champion. And obviously that has worked out. Now, the next thing that I want to see when they actually get to some late game situations when people are healthy I want to see a different diet in those late game situations. I think he needs to experiment with a lot there too. We look at the numbers, and we were going to do an episode on this also. But Tyler Hero has been one of the worst clutch shooters in the league this year, and Bam Adebayo has been one of the best. And so I do think that. But then we talked about yesterday, and Bam had that turnover at the end of the game. So there's going to be hiccups at times. Nothing is absolute, but I want to see maybe more of a focus on going to Bam late in games, especially if you have Duncan in there that he can play off of. So I think there are things that can still be gotten to from like a hoop head perspective here over the next 20 games. There's not a lot for us to talk about the standings. I'm going to have a hard time hyping them going for 7 as opposed to 9, which is really where they're at. And you look at their upcoming schedule, they have a Minnesota and which to me would look like a likely loss, although again, they almost beat Cleveland. Chicago at home, Charlotte at home, but then it's the Clippers at home, Boston at home, Memphis on the road, the Knicks on the road, Detroit at home, Houston at home. Okay, like that's before we get to that. Then you have another Charlotte. They better win the Charlotte games. Okay, they got 2 Charlotte games this month, and then they get the Jimmy game. Okay, Golden State, and then they host Atlanta, which may be one of those games that determines the seeding here down the stretch, because I don't believe they play Orlando again. They don't. So they have Atlanta again. So there's going to be a couple games. Obviously, the Jimmy game we're going to point to.
That's their playing game. That's what they're saving these guys for,
Well, it feels like it, and we joke about that, but some of the best energy, and this is before your time, but some of the best energy I've ever seen Heat team show was when LeBron came back after he left Miami. The Heat, Dwayne had a masterpiece against them. There were other games that, again, LeBron couldn't win in Miami because the Heat would get so jacked up for it. And so it might be that. And you know what will happen, Brady? They'll get up for the Golden State game. They'll beat Golden State by 25, and then they'll have a 12-point lead against Atlanta and blow it down the stretch because Rozier shoots 4 times on the same possession. Anyway, that's it for us. Thanks, Brady. We'll have more episodes coming up. Greg and I are going to do some more historical episodes coming up. One episode we're going to do the best defenders in Miami Heat history. Davion Mitchell's obviously not there yet. He just called Bam the best defender he's ever played with. So we're going to rank the best defenders in Miami Heat history. So if you have any thoughts on that, make sure you're on Off the Floor. We're going to start taking some comments on that. It's hard to narrow it to 10. I will say that. Obviously, there are guys like Zoe, and we know some of the ones, Bruce Bowen, that are going to come up. Obviously, Bam, but it's hard to get it down to 10. Anyway, thank you, Brady. Thanks to All Pro Construction Builders. Price Picks, use the code FIVE.